everyone, welcome to part 2 of the fiction unit. I thought this time around I would turn my video on so this can feel like an actual lecture that would, typically take place in a classroom. And I want to go through part 2 of the fiction unit with you and also go over the 5 practices that I'm going to have you guys do for our next discussion. So what I would do if I were you is I would have maybe like a Google Docs page open, maybe like Microsoft Word or whatever program you're using, and identify each practice distinctly. So practice 1, practice 2, practice 3. This will be so much easier for us to later on read after you have posted your responses. So please organize this well so it does not get confusing. All right, here's my intro. As a demonstration, I put like a little picture collage of Morgan Freeman, who I absolutely love. And the reason why I put Morgan Freeman's pictures is because we're going to be talking about narrators and characters. And what better narrator than, honestly, Morgan Freeman? He can narrate the dictionary and it'll sound interesting. And then I also put, because, he's been an actor for so long, I put some of the films that I love that he's in. Shawshank Redemption, and he's absolutely amazing in that one. Believe it or not, a lot of people don't know about this one, but Seven with Brad Pitt, it's a thriller, and I think it's such an awesome movie, and he plays a really good character. The first film I've ever seen Morgan Freeman in is Glory, and I remember clearly how much he resonated with me, him and Denzel Washington. And then, of course, Bruce Almighty. I mean, who better to play God than Morgan Freeman? So I just thought I would give an example of such a versatile man who can do so many different roles and who does also get selected for the narrator role quite often, but then also can play such different characters too. So what I want to start off with is just describing what a narrator even means, and also going over the different kinds of narrators. So first of all, what's a narrator? A fictional character who tells the story. So it's that voice that we hear in a story. That person that is telling the story can have very different characteristics and categories. So I wanted to give you guys an example. The murderer of, sounds so weird to say that word, murderer of Telltale Heart is the narrator as well. Not only is he the killer, he is also the narrator. So there's different kinds of narrators to consider. First of all, the omniscient narrator. This is the all-knowing. Typically, this is the most common narrator style that is chosen by writers. So if you're reading a novel and it's written in the third person and the writer seems to know everything that everyone is thinking and feeling, that's an omniscient narrator that the writer is creating. Then we have the participant. This is the first person narrator, and this person is participating in the story. So a good example that comes to mind is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Jane Eyre is participating in her own story, but she's also, she's the one that's telling the story, so we get the whole I and me and we pronouns. We also have the observer. So this is the first person narrator who is watching from the side. And one characteristic to keep in mind here is that this person has limited information, because if I am just, like a neighbor and I'm trying to tell the story of my neighbor, I'm not going to have all of the facts. I'm not going to have all of the knowledge. So those gaps are going to be apparent in the story. We also have the non-participant. That's the third person who doesn't participate in the story. This is also a very common strategy to use for writers, because they just kind of like are telling the story from afar, and they're not necessarily, taking any part in the story. They just happen to lay out the events. And then we have the two kinds that are very interesting. We have the innocent and naive narrator, and then we have the unreliable narrator. So the innocent and naive narrator, kind of like a child would tell a story, doesn't seem to understand the full extent of the events taking place. This is the person that might not have the intellect or might not have the full knowledge. This isn't necessarily a person that, doesn't have to be a stupid person, although it can. It may very well be. But it just might be a person that is just, gullible and naive, or doesn't have like maybe the intellectual maturity to understand what the readers are understanding in a particular story. Sometimes if you get the feeling like you're smarter than the narrator is, well, that's done on purpose by the writer. Then we have the unreliable narrator. The unreliable narrator seems to distort the truth. Seems to not just, it's not just like the innocent narrator where they might have like an innocent ignorance to them. The unreliable narrator is one that cannot be trusted. And you realize that as you read a story. So our first practice is going to be related to this. And I would like you to answer the following questions. So I put over here some of the rules. Make sure you explain each answer, and I do want 1 or 2 examples from the text to back up your answer. So what are you doing? I would like you to answer these 2 questions. Number 1, what kind of narrator is the murderer from Telltale Heart? And when I say what kind of narrator, you have all these options to choose from. There's 6 of them. One thing that I do want to pinpoint is that you might have some crossover descriptions. So these are descriptions of narrators, and it might be, for example, you can be a participant and you can also be innocent as a characteristic, as a way to describe the narrator. So it's okay if you describe 2 qualities here of the narrator in question. But whatever you do end up describing, I do want an example to back it up. And the second question, what kind of narrator is the character who tells Miss Emily's story from A Rose for Emily? And again, it's okay if you choose more than 1 quality here, as long as you explain it and as long as you have an example or 2 to back it up. So if you guys want to hit pause right now and then do your practice 1, please go ahead. Otherwise, let's move on. All right, so the next practice I'm going to have you guys do is just a little response. This is an opinion piece, so there is no wrong answer. There are 2 examples I'm giving you. These are techniques that narrators use. And number 1 is the interior monologue, and number 2 is stream of consciousness. So what I did is I gave you guys 2 examples from 2 different stories. One using an interior monologue, which is the inner thoughts of the narrator shown in the story. And number 2 using stream of consciousness, which is a little bit more complicated. So what that means is that the writer is imitating human consciousness. So just to briefly explain that one, human consciousness is not structured. It does not have periods and commas and paragraphs, capitalizations. Human consciousness, the human brain, jumps from one idea, from one thought, from one emotion to the other. And there is no transition. It's not smooth. It's not fluid. And typically, the amazing thing about human consciousness is just the wide variety of thoughts that we are capable of that might not necessarily relate to one another. And that's a very specific style that some writers use. So what I would like you guys to do is read the 2 examples and give me a little response. I'm looking for a paragraph. I would like a response on one of these 2 techniques, and I would like for you to offer your reaction and your opinion on the technique itself. Just read the example and let me know. Do you like it? Do you like this technique? Does it make sense to you? I also put over here, since these are not the most conventional methods that writers use when telling stories, why do you think writers even use them? So let's try to analyze deep here. Make sure to include at least one example in your response. So this is an opinion piece and there is no wrong answer. There's just, whether you are developing your opinion enough or in a limited way. Please develop your opinion. Give me some actual responses to what you think here when it comes to these techniques. All right, again, press pause. Otherwise, let's move on. Now, next we are we're going into characters in stories. And what's a character? Quite simply, a character is an imagined person. The writer creates the character. And there's usually three kinds. There's the flat character. This is a character that has typically one dominant trait. It's a person that doesn't really change throughout the story. Like a side character that remains the same from beginning to end. Like the best friend in a romantic comedy that just kind of comes in the picture just to be the supportive friend on the side, or just to be like the comedian on the side. That would be an example. Then we have the stock character. This is a character that has a common and stereotypical role. So I'm talking about maybe like the jock, that has the Letterman jacket and kind of comes in all confident and cocky and gets all the girls and such a good athlete. Then, we might also have, I don't know, like what's another stock character? There you go. I just thought of it. The hacker, the nerdy hacker. And it's typically some skinny kid that wears glasses and can hack into any computer base. That's just something I'm thinking of. And then we have the round character. These are the really complex characters. And just because they're identified as round characters doesn't mean that they are the protagonist. It could be a side character that also undergoes a change. So these are characters that have complexity and depth, and one characteristic that stands out is the fact that they do change throughout the story. So our next practice, answer these questions. So I would like you to analyze the character of the narrator in A&P. Notice how he doesn't have a name. And what about the girl that is being described in the story, girl? So I put over here, explain your answers, bringing one example from each text to demonstrate. So how would you categorize them as flat, stock, round, what is it, and why? And then give an example. What kind of character is the narrator in Cathedral? And what about Robert, the blind man, in the story Cathedral? And again, same thing. Give a reasoning for your answer along with some examples. Next, I would like you to do practice 4. So I thought this would be an interesting practice where I would have you use any short story, novel, or film that you're thinking of. Identify one flat, one stock, and one round character. So I'm looking for 3 different characters that you're identifying. One character that happens to be flat, one character that happens to be stock, and one that happens to be round. And like I said over here, I'm really looking for specific qualities that you think make them a flat or stock or round character. So give your reasoning, give your explanation. Don't just list it, but also explain why you are listing that. So practice 4 should be an interesting one. You can select any character you want. And finally, practice 5. I put together a collage of some of my favorite characters on TV and film. So take a look. And then I would like you guys to do practice number 5. Let me move myself here. Complete a character analysis chart. You can download it here for a character in your choice of film, novel, or short story. So once you guys open up the chart, I think it will be self-explanatory. Choose a character and go ahead and fill out the chart, and then go ahead and upload the chart. And voila, you're done.